G'day and welcome to the Aussie Pastor Live.
G'day, Harold.
Hi there. It's great to be with you.
Now, you've been away up north, in fact, way up north, is that correct?
Way up north in Cairns, and it was hot and sticky, and you really just, it was hot.
Was it really hot, was it?
Tell us about the air conditioning.
There was air conditioning we needed to, yes.
Yeah, you're up there with family. And
Harold told me yesterday the air conditioning wasn't working.
Oh, okay. That's a very tragic situation. When we've been on the road, we've been known to change hotels because of that, Harold. We don't like that.
It was working just a little, but it could have been better.
Yeah, okay. Look, earlier this week, late last week actually, Russia invaded Ukraine. It's probably been, in my lifetime, the biggest war that I've seen. Seems to be perhaps going a bit longer than a lot of us thought, as Russia's getting bogged down against a very determined Ukrainian army and people, in fact, surprisingly determined people. And I just thought, there are two guys I think of when I think of Russia and Ukraine living here in Australia. There's John Carter and then there's you, Harold Harker. You are comrades in arms, can I say it like that? You work together, you and John Carter, have done for many years. You have a background in both Russia and Ukraine. Can you just tell us briefly about that background?
Well, it was in 1992. John Carter invited me to go and prepare for a big program in Russia, in old Gorky, and I was there for 3 weeks on my own, just with an interpreter. In those days, you had to take everything with you. You could buy practically nothing in the shops. You queued for a loaf of bread if you were lucky, and so we took everything: powdered milk and wheat bix and you name it. But the last time, I have everything there.
So that was the beginning of you going to Russia and Ukraine for a number of great big outreach programs that you did with John Carter. Is that correct?
Yes, and I even did started one over a weekend and then went back for a longer time twice and ran programs myself.
Okay, so how many times have you been to Russia and Ukraine?
I've been to Russia about 12 times. And I've been to Ukraine about 6 or so. I started off in Russia, and John Carter asked me to manage many of his programs over there. I didn't do every one, but I've done a lot of them, and I've come to love the Russian people and the Ukrainian people.
Tell us about the Russians. How did you find them?
I found them very welcoming. In fact, I remember the first time I was there, the leader of the church there said, "Look, we're going to this town of Cheboksary. We're going to run a mission." And I said, "That's great." He said, "Would you like to come? It's just a 4-night one over a weekend." I said, "I'd love to come." He said, "You're going to be the speaker." And I said, "I didn't bring anything." He said, "You've got a Bible and you've got a mouth. You're the speaker." And we ran a program, and let me tell you, the Russians were so eager to hear about the Bible. As soon as the door opened, they raced in and filled the hall from the front seat to the back and standing room. And we started a church in Cheboksary as a result.
In fact, you and John Carter ran outreach programs there that attracted thousands and thousands of people. Am I correct?
That's correct. When John ran in Russia, they even tried to break the doors down because the place was full and they couldn't get in. And when he was in Kiev, they even stopped the trains because the place was just packed.
Now, tell me about the Ukrainians. Are they, and we're Aussies, so we're a long way away from all of this. Are the Ukrainians and the Russians the same people, or are they actually different tribes?
They're similar, but there are big differences as well. They have a similar language, but there are a number of letters in the Ukrainian language that are not in the Russian, and vice versa. When the Ukrainians speak, it's a little softer sound than the Russian speaking, but the Ukrainians are noted to just get to the really and be, anxious to put their view first.
Actually, I was interested. You're talking about the subtle differences in language. One of the ways the Ukrainians are telling the difference between them and Russians is they'll ask them to say a certain word. I think it's the word for bread, and the Russians can't pronounce it the same way as the Ukrainians are. So then the Ukrainians can tell if they're Russian agents or soldiers in there. When you were there, did you notice any tensions between the two people?
Well, you have to think of the history. Ukraine has been invaded by Russia time after time in the past. And so it's become an enemy. And yet when Russia was in control, they all spoke Russian. And so they speak Russian and Ukrainian in Ukraine. But there is that a little animosity. Why does this people from Russia keep coming in invading our country? And the Ukrainians have a lot. This is our country. Let me give you one big example.
Yeah.
Back in about 1932-33, Stalin was introducing the 5-year plan for collectivization of all the farms. And there was a famine right through Russia. Ukraine and Russia are some of the biggest wheat producers in the world.
Yeah, correct.
And when this famine was there, Russia made the Ukrainians send their wheat back to Russia while the Ukrainians were starving. Now, they were starving in Russia too.
Yeah.
But how would you be when you've grown it and then you see it all disappear? That leaves an angst there in those people who say, this is our country. And I can understand their resistance, and I don't think that Putin and his soldiers expected the resistance from the Ukrainians this time.
The ferocity of the resistance.
Yeah.
Did it, having visited both countries and know both peoples well and love both peoples,
Yep.
did the resistance and the ferocity of the Ukrainian resistance, has that surprised you, or is it something that you kind of expected before this blew up if it were to go ahead?
Well, we all thought with the Russia amassing so many tanks, helicopters and people, soldiers, all the way around the country on three sides, we would have thought they would have walked over, but the Ukrainians stood their ground, and the last I heard, they really haven't taken any major city completely yet.
It actually is a bit worrying because you see that with Europe, the United States, we see even now Australia rushing arms into the Ukrainians. This could go for some time yet. It may not be the walkover that the Russians might have hoped for.
That's true. But the people there are great people in both countries, the people themselves. I'm not talking about the leaders. And I saw in the paper this morning, they said Putin might be starting to go senile. But they said he's doing the craziest things, but the people are lovely people. Let me tell you one story. I heard from, I think it was the church in Lviv, in the west of Ukraine. The Russian soldiers, they ran out of petrol, and they didn't know where to go, and they were hungry, asking for food, and some of our members were giving them food because they needed it. That's the love of Jesus that touches hearts.
Yeah, it does. It does. And you hope and pray that the Christian church in Russia and Ukraine stand together through this. In fact, it warms my heart when you see that there are thousands and thousands of Russians protesting in the streets against this war. So for the press to depict it as a Russia versus Ukraine thing is not completely how it is, because there are a lot of Russians who do feel a genuine brotherhood to the Ukrainians and back at them, you know.
That's for sure.
Now, you talked about the differences in language. Are there differences in culture and custom and religion of the two groups?
Both countries had the Eastern Orthodox religion, and Ukrainians have a little bit more Slavic influence. Russia has some too, but Russia has more Eastern ones. And so you have a little difference in food. The Russians will eat more of an Eastern one, whereas the Ukrainians are more Slavic.
Which is kind of from the south, isn't it? Coming up, you're talking Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, those sorts of, even Poland.
Well, you see, that's on their western borders.
That's right.
You are naturally influenced by those around you.
Yeah. How does the gospel and how did the gospel go in Russia and Ukraine when you first went there? And I'm talking specifically the Protestant gospel, the Adventist gospel. How did that go, and how's it going now?
Well, Lloyd, it went like this. When John Carter was first asked to go, and he ran a little program in Moscow in 91, and then he was asked to go to Gorky and run a program there if he was going to run another one. And so he booked the hall. Did you know that after the program, when people were trying to push the doors down to get in, so many wanted to be baptized, he baptized a couple of thousand there, and the Russian army even took their semi-trailers down for a platform and erected the tents for the people to change for their baptism. Let me tell you another one about Ukraine. The Eastern Orthodox Church didn't like John Carter coming to Ukraine, and he was going to run a big program in Kiev.
Which is, right now, is that major city under attack?
It is.
Yeah.
And in that place, the Archbishop said, he'll do this over my dead body. And a week later, he's dead.
And he was buried under the footpath.
He was, because they wouldn't let him bury him in the church, so they dug up the footpath and buried him there. But the gospel has come through with, and I have seen the thousands upon thousands of people who were communists, who became Christians, who love the Lord and are waiting for his return. I just hope and pray for my brothers and sisters in both Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, there are about 45,000 Adventists in Russia and maybe about 55,000 in Ukraine, talking about the church I belong to now that you belong to, Harold. Would it be fair to say that a lot of them are there because of the ministry of both John Carter and yourself? Would that be a fair comment?
I wouldn't say all of them by a long way, but John Carter has certainly, he's been 49 times to Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And run many programs and gone back to visit them. I went back in the middle of winter once to visit with them. And but there are others. We had, when I was in leadership here, we had 5 conferences send local Adventists over there to run programs. And Americans have run programs too. So there have been a lot of programs run, not just John Carter, although he made probably Gorky become the Adventist center of Russia. And Kiev, the baptism was the biggest one since Christianity ever came to Ukraine.
That's incredible. My dad went there, and I think he went there as a result of John Carter.
That's right.
He talked about the hall being so full they couldn't fit them in, and the KGB had to turn up to help control the crowds. And the KGB were actually in the program, watching the program, and some of them gave their hearts to Jesus. So amazing. Those days, I guess it was, the 80s and 90s?
The 90s, and John went there first in 91, so it was the 90s and just after the 2000.
They were heady days for the gospel in Ukraine and Russia, weren't they?
And let me tell you why it has changed a little.
Yep.
In those days, you couldn't get anything in the shops. I asked for some flat black paint for our blackboards. They said, through the interpreter, what do you mean flat paint? You run over it with your car. And they said, I said, take me to the paint shop. They said, we didn't have a paint shop. And they had 3 tins in it like a little store, and that was their whole paint. And it was black and white. That was all.
So that's all changed, though, hasn't it?
And now it's completely changed. And when people have got used to everything, then that has taken away the love of to get to know Jesus.
So they've become more secular and westernised like us.
Secularisation has taken place.
Do you expect the war to change the church? Will there be tensions between the Russian and the Ukrainian church? Or do you think, there's an honest question, or do you think the blood of Christ is enough?
Well, I think the blood of Christ will keep the church together, but how it will depend on the country's relationships. I understand there's going to be peace talks on the Belarus border, But what happens, I hope peace comes. I'm praying for peace. We know that 100,000 or more have already fled Ukraine, and they expect it to go to the millions. And obviously, many church members will have left too. But it's mainly the women and children who are fleeing. The men have been told to stay there and fight.
Actually, it's amazing how universally the men are staying there and fighting, and not just that. They're flooding into the country. Ukrainians are coming back from all around the world to fight. I read a story this morning about a guy who worked for a Russian billionaire in Germany. Did you pick that up? And he was the engineer of the boat, and he sank it over there in Majorca. And when he sank the boat, he was arrested, and he said, "Well, this Russian oligarch, I think that's how you say it, however, he's making weapons to kill Ukrainians." And he says, "I'm going back." And the police released him, and he's gone back into Ukraine. I see that it's quite troublesome. Australian Ukrainians are going home to fight. It's really on, and for whatever reasons, the Ukrainians really seem to be stirred up. How do you, with your experience over there, how do you view this will all end, or do you really don't know?
I really don't know, but I know there is only one answer. Jesus is the King of Peace. And the only real peace will come when people accept Jesus and follow his rules. And I would pray for peace. I pray for our church members. I pray for the countries. But war is always horrible. It's never good, and it never has a good result.
You know what? I'm one of these guys who often wakes up at night, Harold, and I'll be awake for half an hour or more, you know. And I pray for a few things. I pray for my dad, who's not too well. I pray for my church at New Hope. Pray for Hunty and our ministry here. I've been praying also for Russia and Ukraine. I think there are many beautiful people in both countries. And
you're right.
What we're seeing is an unfolding end-time tragedy. And the sad thing is I think we might see more of it before Jesus comes. Last question. What is your message to us Aussies, all Australians who are watching on as this brutal war is fought?
While we're so far away, but we should still be praying for peace and working for it. There is no place for people to fight people. And I think that we should be praying as Aussies, helping naturally we go to help the ones who are besieged. The Ukrainians probably have more of our thoughts now and our prayers than the Russians do. But let's be friends to all people that pray for peace.
Actually, Hunty and I were talking earlier this morning. The Russians are copping it, though, with sanctions, people losing their life savings. Interest rates.
Even the Swiss bank have frozen their funds now.
Yeah, interest rates have gone up 20% overnight. They're
banks are being run
struggling to buy food. Everyone's running the banks and trying to get cash. There's chaos in Russia, and I think not only do the Ukrainians who are in war need our prayers, I think we need to pray for the Russians too.
Yep.
Amen.
Yeah, well, thank you, Harold, and appreciate that very much. We'll probably have you back in the next week or two in your regular slot talking to us about the Reformation and great heroes of old, but perhaps we might get an update from you now and again on how things, even as this war settles down, and all wars do end. They do come to an end. Once things once things settle down, we might talk to you more about what's going on over there, because I know that both you and John Carter have an inside link to both those countries.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thanks for joining the Aussie Pastor. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to find out more about Jesus, our ministry, or ways to support us, go to findjesus.tv.